Welcome to the deep dive.
It's good to be here.
So our mission is pretty straightforward, really. We take a whole stack of material, articles, research notes.
Lots of notes.
Exactly. And we dive in deep, pull out the most important bits, the surprising stuff.
Yeah, basically a shortcut, so you can get genuinely well-informed without drowning in information overload.
And today, we're diving into something really fascinating. What actually makes movements happen, specifically Christian movements?
Right. And we're looking at the kind of people who lead these things. The sources call them movement pioneers.
Yeah, this material we've got, it just gives these incredible windows into the history, the practical side of it.
The nuts and bolts.
The characteristics of these movements, and but the pioneers God seems to use. We're basically going to explore this stuff together, see what jumps out.
Because it's definitely not just abstract theory. It's about, the big picture and the really personal stories behind how the gospel spreads, sometimes in really unexpected ways.
Okay, let's just jump right in then. One thing that immediately hit me, right from the sources, is this idea that movement isn't some external program you just launch.
No, not at all.
The material really hammers this home. It's about partnering with God, and maybe surprisingly, it starts inside, like way inside, from the inside out.
And what's really compelling is how the author uses his own story. It's very raw, actually. He talks about hitting this wall August 2008.
Wasn't just a bad day, right?
Oh, no. He describes deep depression, feeling totally lost, afraid, questioning, like everything. His legacy, his purpose, all of it.
Sounds like real rock bottom. The sources mention that feeling of, no guarantees. Like everything he'd built might just, poof, vanish.
Exactly that. And the turning point, crucially, wasn't that his circumstances magically got better.
Right.
It was internal. Profoundly internal. He sort of stopped clinging to his own dreams, his plans.
And focused instead on
the promises. God's everlasting love. His ultimate victory in history. That certainty. He describes just surrendering, telling God basically, I'll trust you, I'll serve you, even if my dreams die, even if this despair stays.
Wow. Okay, so he loses what he thought was everything, legacy, plans, and that's what freed him up. That feels, it goes against a lot of leadership thinking, doesn't it?
It does. But the sources suggest that this deep internal work, it sort of untethers you. Untethers leaders from personal agendas, from fear, from the need to control or get recognition, things that can actually box God in.
Oh, okay.
He wasn't just recovering, he was like remade. He had this deep conviction about God's love, God's win, and suddenly everything he had before felt like a gift, not something he had to hoard or protect. He felt he'd lost it all, found God, and came out. The phrase he uses is free and dangerous.
Free and dangerous. I like that.
Ready for multiplication, not just addition.
Yeah, that makes sense. That God can use these crisis moments to remake leaders. The sources paint this picture, leaders being unsettled from comfortable ministry, feeling like the Israelites in the wilderness, right?
Exactly. Can't go back, not sure how to go forward. And it's in that kind of lost place that God does this deep reframing, shifts the reliance completely off self onto him. And that connects to another really key lesson in the material. Being the expert just isn't enough. There's that story about his wife right after his first book came out.
Oh, yeah, that was powerful. She basically says, great book, but when are you going to do something?
Oof, yeah. Talk about a challenge.
Right.
It highlights that huge gap between knowing the principles and actually, living them. Being an expert versus being a practitioner.
Yeah.
You realized, yeah, I am the expert, but I'm not doing it.
Another one of those cage-rattling moments, as the sources put it, pushing him from theory into action. Okay, so you've got this internal transformation, this shift from knowing to doing. But then what? What about Monday morning? Someone feels called make disciples, but they genuinely don't know how.
Yeah, that's a huge issue the sources tackle. People feel stuck. They drift back into just running programs or focusing on, secondary goals instead of the main thing.
And the danger, the sources point out, is just telling people, go do it without any actual training.
Right. It sets them up to fail. Then they feel guilty, and they become dependent on the professionals, the pastors, to do the real ministry.
So the solution isn't just rah-rah motivation. It's training, then action.
Precisely. You teach simple, reproducible things. How to share your story, how you came to faith, how to share the basic gospel story. And this is crucial. You push them out of the nest. Go do it.
Even in small ways.
Especially in small ways. When people step out, obey, they see God show up. That's what builds faith. That's where the real learning happens out in the field. But the training gives them that initial confidence to just start.
And the sources really highlight these simple, powerful methods. Discovery Bible Study, DBS, comes up a lot.
Yeah, DBS is huge in this material. It's designed so anyone, believer or not, can encounter Jesus right there in the Bible and figure out how to obey him.
How does it work? What's the process?
It's beautifully simple, really.
Mhm.
You read a passage together, then you ask a few key questions like, what do we learn about God or Jesus here?
Okay.
What about people in this story? Is there a command we should obey, or maybe an example to follow? And then the kicker, the action question. So what are you going to do this week to obey this, and who are you going to share it with?
So the Bible's the teacher, everyone chips in, and it's all geared towards actually doing something and passing it on.
Exactly. It sounds almost too simple, maybe.
A little bit, yeah.
But that's the whole point the sources make.
Yeah.
Methods matter, but they have to be simple enough, yet profound and contagious, so anyone can grab it and run with it. Sharing stories, DBS, they fit that bill.
Okay, so people get trained, they start doing it. How do you keep that momentum going? How do you stop it from fizzling out?
That's where these regular practitioner gatherings come in. The sources stress this. It's not church as usual. They call it the engine room for movements.
Engine room, okay.
Yeah. The focus is reflection and accountability, using really specific questions like, okay, what have you actually done since we last met? How did you see God at work this week? Where are you feeling stuck? What's the very next step you need to take? And crucially, how can we pray for you right now?
So it keeps that cycle of action and learning turning over.
That's the idea. Keeps the focus sharp.
And if we zoom out, these simple steps, this focus on obeying and sharing, this is where we start seeing those movement pioneers emerge, right? The people the sources talk about, who exactly are they?
Well, the definition in the material is pretty clear. They're people driven to take the gospel where it hasn't really taken root yet. They've got this no place left vision, meaning they're not satisfied until everyone in their city or their region or their whole people group has genuinely had a chance to hear and respond.
And they lead from that inside-out place we started with.
Absolutely. The sources say they prioritize finding the right person, someone God's already preparing, someone responsive, rather than just starting with a grand strategy or the perfect method.
Looking for those persons of peace the Gospels talk about.
Exactly. And fascinatingly, the sources point out these pioneers are often, well, unqualified by the usual standards. Peter's the classic example they use.
Peter the fisherman.
That one. The religious leaders, the establishment, they dismissed him, called him an uneducated amateur.
Wow.
But his real qualification, the sources emphasize, wasn't seminary. It was that he had been with Jesus.
Ah.
Pioneers often learn like that. Like Peter learned from Jesus.
Yeah.
On the job, watching, doing, not necessarily years in a classroom first.
And Peter's presented as like the first big pioneer after Jesus himself.
He was absolutely pivotal. God picked him to be the bridge, really, between the Jewish and the Gentile missions. His transformation alone is incredible, from impulsive guy who denies Jesus
Yeah.
to this bold, spirit-filled preacher at Pentecost.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And his whole ministry focus changed, didn't it?
Dramatically. After Pentecost, he and the other apostles, their priority was clear. Prayer and the ministry of the word. He wasn't just settling down to pastor one church.
No.
He was leading an expanding missionary movement. You see him moving out from Jerusalem, Judea, Galilee, Samaria, the coastal cities. He couldn't be contained. He intentionally went beyond. He wasn't going to be fenced in.
Okay, so beyond Peter, the sources bring up some amazing historical examples, too.
Oh, yeah. Hudson Taylor is foundational. Pioneer the whole faith mission idea, aiming for the interior of China.
Right.
He completely bucked the norms, adopting Chinese dress, relying only on God for funds, no guaranteed salary, starting the China Inland Mission with this huge vision for those unreached provinces. And he did this despite battling illness, depression, serious personal struggles.
Didn't he have that map, that accusing map?
Yes, the accusing map. Pins where the missionaries were, all clustered on the coast. And the vast, empty interior just stared back at him. That drove him, fueled that radical commitment.
Then there's William Taylor. Different guy, different context.
Yeah, Methodist pioneer.
Yeah.
He really pushed back against relying on the mission board money, the subsidies.
How so?
He recruited differently sound people on the fringe, maybe less polished, less formally educated than typical missionaries back then. And he focused on planting self-supporting missions among indigenous groups. The sources say his methods were sometimes seen as a bit unconventional, maybe even loud.
Froth and bombast, I think was the phrase.
Yeah, something like that. But hey, they saw major movements happen where others weren't seeing much fruit.
And then, just to show the sheer range of who God uses, there's Victor Landero.
Now that's a story, a modern example.
Yeah.
This guy owned bars, brothels. He was a violent moneylender in Colombia, just completely transformed by reading a Bible someone gave him. Seriously. Becomes a movement pioneer in his area. It just shows, doesn't it? God can use absolutely anyone.
No.
Ordinary people, messy pasts, doesn't matter. He sparks extraordinary things through them.
So what this history seems to show, according to the sources, is that these big gospel breakthroughs, especially in unreached places, they often need focused mission structures.
Yeah, and here's the interesting part.
Huh.
Those structures often start outside the established traditional church center.
Not from the seminaries or the big denominations necessarily.
Often not. Frequently, it's unrecognized groups, ordinary people just getting on with it.
So how do these new mission bands or groups relate to the existing churches? Is there tension?
Oh, there can definitely be tension. The sources talk about this. The ideal is described as an interdependent partnership. They want to avoid the extremes, right?
Yeah.
Either the established church trying to control everything because they have the money.
Which can stifle things.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or the mission band going completely rogue and independent. The goal is always partnership for developing local leaders and seeing churches reproduce, ideally for multiple generations. But yeah, that control dynamic from resource-rich churches can unintentionally kill the pioneering spirit needed for breakthrough.
Okay, this connects to those 5 levels of leadership the sources describe. The ones needed for a multiplying movement.
Right. It's helpful to think of them as different roles, maybe stages in whole movement ecosystem.
Yeah.
Level 1, the foundation, is the seed sower.
Okay.
This is basically any disciple who's just obeying Jesus, spreading the gospel. Maybe they've mastered sharing their story, the gospel story. Maybe they lead a simple DBS group. The vision is that every believer can and should be a seed sower,
Got it. Level 2.
the church planter. This person is leading people to faith, training them in the basics of following Jesus, and actually forming them into new church communities. You know, places where they practice the core stuff. Lord's Supper, changing lives, loving each other, serving, witnessing.
And then level 3 is where that multiplication really kicks in.
That's the church multiplier.
Yeah.
This is the big shift.
Yeah.
This person isn't just focused on pastoring one church, however big or successful. Their heart is set on seeing multiple generations of churches spring up.
How do they do that?
They intentionally release authority. They empower local leaders. And they're constantly looking for the next unreached field to start new streams of churches. The sources say this is often the critical bottleneck, especially in the West. We're often good at addition, not multiplication.
Okay. Above the church multiplier.
Level 4 is the multiplication trainer. Think of this as a church multiplier who's done it. They've seen 3rd or 4th generation churches happen in their network, and now they focus on equipping other church multipliers.
Coaching the coaches?
Sort of, yeah. They influence beyond their own direct network. And ideally, they've got that zero-to-church field experience themselves. They know how to start from scratch.
And the top level described.
Level 5 is the movement catalyst. This is someone holding that no place left vision for a really large area, maybe a whole people group. They're training leaders at all the other levels, mobilizing resources strategically, overseeing the whole multiplication strategy. Paul's the biblical prototype.
Like Nathan Shank or Jeff Sundell mentioned in the sources today.
Exactly. Those are modern examples given.
Now, it's important, the sources say, this isn't like a corporate ladder, right? Not about status.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Every level is vital. The whole thing collapses without seed sowers. And not everyone needs to hit level 5. The core principle driving progression, according to the sources, isn't climbing higher. It's becoming a better servant who empowers more people. You move up by giving power away.
And the key distinction is where the investment goes. Traditional churches often focus on levels 1 and 2 seed sowers, church planters, which is addition.
Right. But movement pioneers, they understand the leverage is investing in levels 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
The multipliers, the trainers, the catalysts. That's where you get the exponential growth. That's movement.
Let's make this really concrete. The sources have some powerful modern stories. Nathan Shank, you mentioned him, a movement catalyst.
Yeah, Nathan's story is pretty open in the material. He talks about working incredibly hard himself, planting churches, doing all the right things, but then having this moment of realizing his efforts, however skilled, were just a drop in the ocean compared to the need. Hundreds of millions of people.
So what did he do?
He had to get over himself, basically.
Yeah.
Realized he was the lid on multiplication because he was trying to do too much. So he shifted entirely to mobilizing and training thousands of ordinary local believers. empowering them. And that's when they saw significant multiplication take off in South Asia.
Wow. Then there's Lipok's story.
Incredible story.
Yeah.
Theological student, deep struggle with heroin addiction, gets transformed, feels called to the missing people, starts off conventionally, plants 3 traditional churches, even gets buildings going.
Okay.
But then he gets this movement training, and it just flips a switch. He completely changes his approach, starts empowering ordinary farmers to be church planters using super simple methods.
And the result?
The sources report it was explosive. From those 3 churches to 60 churches.
In 6 months.
60.
Yeah.
In 6 months.
Yeah. Just by empowering new believers to immediately share and start groups. Simple, reproducible.
And Kumar, son of a Hindu priest.
Kumar was trying traditional church planting, but he got really frustrated because it just created dependency. People relied on him. His breakthrough, just 1 hour of training, he grasped the simplicity, the reproducibility.
Yeah.
1 hour, that's the sources say. And he immediately put it into practice. Empowered his disciple, Israel, who was an illiterate street sweeper, empowered him to lead groups, baptize people. Kumar intentionally stepped back, refused to be the bottleneck. And his network just took off, grew way beyond his own initial dream of 10,000 churches.
It's amazing to hear these global stories, but the sources also show that this isn't just for, over there. Jeff Sundell brought this back to the U.S.
Yeah, Jeff had experience pioneering among Tibetan Buddhists in Asia. Then he came back and started modeling the same principles in his American neighborhood.
How? What did that look like? Super simple stuff. Raking leaves for a neighbor, finding needs, praying for them, looking for those people of peace. He showed that finding God-prepared people and starting simple discovery groups works anywhere. He did it himself, then trained others. Neil, Dean, Clint are mentioned, empowering them.
And Gary Stump, pastor of a big church.
Gary's story is raw. He talks about being wrecked. He compared his successful megachurch, maybe baptizing 1,000 people over time, with the movement he saw in East Asia, where they were seeing hundreds of thousands of churches, millions baptized.
That comparison must have been jarring.
Totally. He realized his whole structure, focused on the ABCs, attendance, buildings, cash, just wasn't built for that kind of multiplication. So he made a really hard turn, gave up chasing the ABCs, focused instead on mobilizing everyone in his church to be seed sowers, start simple groups, saw hundreds pop up, many with non-believers involved from the get-go.
And Fred and Melissa Campbell, another U.S. example.
Yeah, sent out to pioneer. They struggled at first using more conventional methods. Their breakthrough came when they switched to the simple DMM principles disciple-making movement. Intentionally looking for those houses of peace Jesus talks about in Luke 10, training new believers immediately to share and start groups.
And I saw results.
Yeah, rapid group formation, new churches starting in really diverse places. There's even a story about an outdoor church starting in a housing development just because they were out there singing gospel songs.
Which leads right into the next big question. Can existing traditional churches actually become catalysts for this kind of thing? Not just grow bigger themselves, but spark movements.
The sources say yes, absolutely possible. But it's not easy. It's often a painful transition. It doesn't just happen automatically.
What are some examples they give?
There's Kwesi Young and Global Harvest Church. Small church, African immigrants in North Carolina. They overcame cultural hurdles to reach their African American and Hispanic neighbors. How? By loving loud, praying for needs right in the middle of a mini riot, persistently sharing, starting DBS groups in homes. Simple relational stuff.
Then Peter Snyman and the Lighthouse in South Africa, a big church.
Yeah, large church, strong history of social action. But they hit a point where they realized their institutional structure, good as it was, wasn't actually effective for reaching the unreached, globally or even locally sometimes. They went through a really challenging, painful shift toward empowering every single member through things like DBS. Build a coalition focused on citywide movements. The breakthrough wasn't better programs, it was empowering people.
And Don at Sugar Creek Baptist in Texas, the megachurch reaching refugees.
What's key in that story is the decision they made. They sent teams out, yes, but they consciously chose not to just absorb all the new believers into their main campus.
Why not?
They wanted to empower them. So they helped these new believers form and reproduce churches within their own communities, led by leaders from those communities. That empowerment piece was crucial for multiplication.
Crossway Church in Australia is another model mentioned.
Yeah, they actively plant churches, send missionaries. But significantly, they also help start and support a separate mission agency focused specifically on disciple-making movements. Shows how an established church can strategically channel resources towards pioneering structures. And when we look at these transitions in the sources, you see patterns, right?
Like what?
It's always described as a work of God, first off, not just clever strategy. Often, an outsider, a movement pioneer, comes alongside and acts as a catalyst. Maybe stirs up discontent, casts vision, offers simple methods. Identifying those early adopters inside the church, people already restless for more, is key. And just like the pioneer groups, they need consistent team meetings, accountability, learning, praying through the inevitable pushback.
It sounds hard. Painful, even.
The sources are clear. It often is. Letting go of control, comfort, tradition. It's tough. But keeping the focus on the gospel, on seeing lives changed, that seems to be what helps churches push through.
Okay, now we get into maybe the most challenging but also incredibly hopeful section. Movements in really tough places. Specifically, the sources talk a lot about the House of Islam.
Yeah, this is remarkable. Historically, for centuries really, there wasn't much visible fruit, not many large movements of Muslims coming to faith in Christ in many areas. But the sources describe this dramatic shift recently. The phrase they use is, "a wind is blowing."
A wind is blowing. That's evocative.
Isn't it? It captures that sense of something supernatural happening. The material reports dozens of new movements emerging just in the last couple of decades. Across the map, North Africa, Middle East, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, places where this just wasn't happening before on this scale. It's unprecedented in modern times.
Can you give an example? Hussein's story?
Hussein is a Muslim background pioneer. His method: rides his scooter between villages, looks for Muslims who are open, curious about Isa al-Masih Jesus.
That's it.
Pretty much. Simple conversations in tea houses. Relational. And he started seeing incredible transformation, multiplication. That story of Sadiq, the violent moneylender we mentioned earlier, that was through Hussein's work. His changed life impacted the whole village. Hussein now apparently has groups following Isa in thousands of villages.
Wow. And the sources mention something surprising, how the Quran itself can be a bridge.
Yeah, this is a really key insight for pioneers in that context. The Quran actually is quite a bit about Isa al-Masih. It calls him holy. It says he was powerful, did miracles, and importantly, it says he knows the way to heaven because Allah raised him up.
Points that Muslims already accept.
Exactly. So those points can create genuine curiosity. It makes Muslims open to reading Injil, the Gospels, to find out what Isa himself actually taught and commanded. They want to know more about this prophet they already revere.
So how do pioneers find these open individuals, these persons of peace?
Several ways highlighted. Simple acts of kindness, building trust, offering prayer. Many Muslims value prayer and seeing specific answers, dreams, visions, healings in Jesus' name. That's powerful. And just actively looking for those people God's already preparing, people asking questions, seeking truth. The pioneer's role then is just to help them and often their families discover Jesus for themselves in the Bible, usually through those simple discovery groups.
Basir is another leader mentioned, a Muslim background pioneer.
Basir is held up as exceptional in how quickly he empowers people. He doesn't treat new believers like they need years of training before they can do anything.
What does he do instead?
He treats them as partners immediately, equips them with simple tools, share your story, lead a DBS group. And the results described are just stunning. For every 10 people he baptizes, typically 8 of them go on to start their own discipleship group that becomes a new church.
8 out of 10, starting new groups.
Yeah, that's multiplication baked in from day one. Just incredible empowerment.
But this kind of work, especially in these difficult places, it must come at a huge cost.
Oh, absolutely. The sources are very upfront about this. Bill Smith, one of the pioneers mentioned, apparently uses this stark checklist when training people. What would it take to stop you?
And the list includes
real things pioneers face: imprisonment, beatings, murder, forced disappearance. It's brutal.
like that heartbreaking story of Daw. Transformed life, became a pioneer. Then he, his wife, his child just taken, never seen again.
Yeah. The suffering is real and immense, and the sources connect this directly to the nature of real apostolic authority.
Which isn't about title or rank.
No, not about status at all. True apostolic authority, the material argues, is power that's given away. Used to empower others, bring them into Jesus' power. It refuses personal gain, refuses control. And here's a powerful insight. This kind of ministry is uniquely marked by suffering.
More than miracles, even.
Paul seemed to think so. The sources point out he listed his sufferings arguably above his signs and wonders as proof of his genuine apostleship.
So there's this tension, this balance, power and suffering.
Exactly. Power of the signs, wonders, Holy Spirit moving balanced with weakness, the willingness to embrace suffering for the gospel for others. You need both. Power without the cross lacks integrity. Weakness without power lacks impact. Pioneers live in that tension. They face hardship, disappointment, opposition, crushing loneliness. But they also see God's power unleashed. Prayers answered like crazy, the gospel spreading where it seemed impossible. And for them, the sources are clear. The price, however high, is worth it to see people find Jesus.
That brings up the issue of resources again. Outside help, outside money. Blessing or curse.
It's complex, and the sources are pretty blunt. It can very easily be a curse, especially well-meaning Western money.
How so?
It can poison the well, basically, creates dependency, fosters a professional class of paid pastors who end up more accountable to the foreign donors than their own people. It can slow down, even kill the natural indigenous multiplication process.
So wise pioneers are careful.
Extremely careful. They filter outside help. The sources say they'll accept support for things like training costs, maybe travel for multipliers going to new areas, Bibles, but not salaries for local pastors or planters. That has to come from within. That keeps it indigenous, self-sustaining, led by people called by God, not paid by foreigners.
But good partnerships can exist.
Oh, yeah. Often it looks like an outsider serving as a mentor trainer, coming alongside, helping the local pioneer think clearly, solve problems. But often that outsider's story stays quiet. The focus remains on the local work, which is how it should be.
Okay, so wrapping all this together, what's the big takeaway? Where does this leave us?
Well, it brings us right back to that bedrock hope the sources constantly point to. The end of the story is fixed. God wins. History is heading towards his triumph.
The Lamb wins. People from every tribe, tongue, nation.
Absolutely certain. More certain than tomorrow's sunrise. That's the ultimate reality.
And we're living now in that overlap of the ages, as the material puts it. We've got this incredible treasure in jars of clay.
Yeah, showing the power is God's, not ours. And the gospel will reach the ends of the earth. Those giants standing in the way, they will fall. It's guaranteed.
The living Lord is at work. And he invites us to partner with him in that mission. These pioneers we've looked at, they're just stunning examples of saying yes to that invitation.
They really are. Taking God at his word about his victory.
So here's maybe the final thought to wrestle with. If these movement pioneers, fueled by God's certain victory, are willing to pay such an incredibly high price facing jail, beatings, death, to partner with God to stare down these huge giants, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What giants might God be calling you to stare down today, right where you are? What does partnering with God's guaranteed win look like? Not in some far-off land, but in your context.